recording, and we'll send out the link for the chevra that need to. There we go. Copy the link, and then we'll put it in the thing. Boom. There we go. Now Sam can join us. So the pasuk at the beginning of Bereshis tells us the world was the aretz. The world was tohu. It was empty. Bo. It was chaotic. V'choshech. It was dark. There was darkness. Al pnei tehom, above the deep. V'ruach Elokim, and the spirit of Hashem merachefet was hovering above the water. That's the pasuk. And we explained this a little bit with regards to science. And last week we mentioned the Medrash, that Medrash Rabbah, it's in a few other places, but quoting from Reish Lakish, that this pasuk is describing the 4 kingdoms that would rule the world. Those 4 kingdoms being Babylonia, and then the Persian Medes, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans. Now, practically speaking, we also noted that these are not the only 4 kingdoms that have ever ruled the world. And the Gemara has a discussion in Maseches Megillah about which emperors ruled over the world. It's interesting point out. I think we noted this in the Ramban. The Ramban refers to the Galgal Haaretz, the sphere of the world. And the Gemara Megillah refers to those that ruled over Kippat Haaretz, the dome of the world, meaning nobody thought that the world was flat at any point in time, certainly not in Chazal. But this idea of ruling over the world, we know that the Jewish people were subjugated between the first Beis HaMikdash and the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash by 4 kingdoms. But those are not the only 4 kingdoms that we have been subjected by. Most notably, Mitzrayim is not included in that list. And then there's a big discussion, where does Yishmael fit into that discussion? Because according to many of the Svarim, coming in, according to many of the Svarim, the fourth kingdom is the kingdom of Edom. The Malchus HaRasha is the kingdom of Edom, and there's a question, that's Rome, that's Esav. Where does Yishmael fit in? We'll see 2 different opinions within that discussion. Shkach, you want to l'chaim? Okay, yeah, you can change your mind if you want. There you go. So those 4 kingdoms we discussed, and then we mentioned how these are 4 malchios, 4 malchus, and we pointed out that the idea of malchus, of a kingdom, does not just mean a government, it doesn't just mean sovereignty, and it doesn't just mean dominion over a particular space or place or whatever it might be. Malchus means a society that is self-contained, with an identity and an ideology and a perspective and a way of living and a way of looking at the world and a way of experiencing and explaining and educating its world. Meaning it is a worldview from top to bottom that influences every aspect of everything inside of it. And we give the example for America is a malchus. The United States of America is a malchus, undoubtedly. It is a exceedingly powerful, arguably the most powerful in probably the last few hundred years. Certainly for the last few hundred years, it has been the most powerful malchus. It has a language, and it has a culture, and it has art, and it has music, and it has cuisine, and it has dress, and it has fashion, and it has ideas and ideologies and ways of doing business. The United States of America is the poster child of the West, so to speak. And when you consider that probably before the USA became the dominant malchus in the West, before that was probably the UK. But the UK today, while it still very much does have its own quirks, operates on a American mentality to a very significant extent. Meaning the idea of democracy was not a British invention. It was kind of a French invention, maybe-ish, but it was not a British invention. The British monarchy is relegated to some very expensive but also high-earning sightseeing tours to a large extent, but effectively are irrelevant in the government. Meaning, the Queen, Zichron Livracha, gave her blessing to things. The King, I'm not sure anybody's heard any news about him doing anything at all. Right. I'm saying, but they've been figureheads for over a century, at least. There's very little that the British monarchy does. They make a lot of money. They have a lot of money, but they make a lot of money. That is the number one export, largely, of the British royal family is tourism. Meaning that's the thing that they bring to Great Britain is tourism. People don't come because they identify with the values of the crown. It's still a geschmack that British people have when they see the flag above Buckingham Palace. Okay, there's a chashivas to it, but the worldview is not a British worldview. It's not operating on British values. It's operating on American values. France used to have French value. Yeah, they have French cuisine. That's fine. But for years and years and years, France and England went to war against each other. They had competing ideologies and competing identities. And now the only thing that separates them, aside from a little bit of language and a little bit of food, is a sea. Right? That's the only thing that separates them. And the rest of Europe, forget about it. The rest of Europe used to have each place was its own malchus. Spain was a malchus. Spain and Portugal were separate malchus. Now it's whichever airline is cheapest to get you to Israel, that's the one that you know what I'm saying? It's not, these places, they don't even have their own currency anymore. And they would all tell you that this is all because they've embraced love and brotherhood and peace and whatnot. But at the end of the day, the idea of each one having its own malchus to a certain extent has disappeared. It's disappeared. Malchus that exist in the world today, arguably, are the US, China, Russia, Iran, maybe India. Malchus. I don't think that there's any other country that is identifiable and self-contained and large enough to sustain itself. It's Malchus. Now, these Malchus that exist in the world today do not have the capacity to, they don't rule over the world. Certainly not the world that's around them. There's a lot of tension that exists between them. But there were Arba Malchus that ruled over the world. These four kingdoms dominated the world. Now, not entirely. They did go to war. But even the wars that they fought, they were dominant culturally. Even in the areas that they were still at war, what they didn't win militarily, they won culturally. When the Greeks, for example, Hanukkah is coming. So when the Greeks took over the world, they didn't win every battle. But the world became Hellenized. The whole Hanukkah story, and we'll talk about this moment when we get to Hanukkah, the whole Hanukkah story, let's just understand, is not a story of Greek invaders to Israel. Most of Israel was Hellenized. They were all part of the Greek society. The problem was that they were a bunch of ultra-Orthodox Haredi people that said it came to a breaking point where they said, okay, if you want to be part of this whole Greek thing, then it's enough of this temple service. And then they fought against that, and they said, no, let us at least have freedom of religion. And they said, no. Greeks said, absolutely not. This backwards, ancient, Judean culture, we've got to get rid of it. It is antithetical to the, all of the philosophy and sport and culture and language and music and poetry and comedies and tragedies and all the rest of it. I shut it down. Then they put a tzelem in the Heichal, they put an idol in the Beis HaMikdash, and they ransacked the Beis HaMikdash. They said no. And then a group of Haredim that we call the Maccabim, that it was the Haredim that put on the IDF uniforms then. And they fought, and they won. It was not clear that they were going to win, certainly not to them. Like it was, and that's the whole of the Alanisim that you say. The Rabbi b'miyad ma'atim, that there were many that felt the hands of a few. It was, but I understand that most of Eretz Yisrael had been taken over by Greeks, not in war. The whole country was Hellenized, secularized, was turned Greek. The whole thing, and there was like details of religion at the end of it that became questionable. But like everybody there was part of Greek society. Like they went to Greek schools and they learned Greek and they studied philosophy. Like they were all into the stuff. Not unlike we today study Western sciences and Western language and Western literature as our dominant culture. Meaning, we have in Jewish day schools, you have Limudei Kodesh and you have Limudei Chol, right? Jewish studies and then you have other studies. So there's a question, where's Jewish history? So Shaila, in every yeshiva, they have to ask this question. Where does Jewish history belong? Is Jewish history Limudei Kodesh or is it Limudei Chol? And the answer to that question is, it shouldn't be a question, right? In Israel today, is Jewish history Limudei Kodesh or Limudei Chol? It's taught everywhere, both in secular schools, in religious schools, in different ways. But the Jewish history that's taught in many secular schools in Israel is Tanakh. Starts from there. Meaning, and this is what we spoke about at the end of the shir last week, is at a certain point in time, your religion and your culture like meld into each other. They're not distinguishable from each other. If Jewish history is Tanakh, then the Bible is not a religion book. It is a cultural treasure. Not because of what it said, but because of what it says. This defines my history. This talks about me. This is, I speak the same language as King David. I had this fight with a guy. This is fun. Remember, like it was around now. It was a year ago. The like all the major Jewish organizations in the country like put together a rally in Washington. And that massive rally in Washington. Yeah, you were there.
We were there.
So I was there, and I got on the subway to get back to the airport. And there's this random dude that like started like accosting me about, you Zionists and you. And he was not a Palestinian. He was not an Arab. It was unclear to me where he was from. It sounded like he was like Caribbean-ish, but like unclear exactly where he was coming from. But he started like harassing me. It was me and one other guy, just the two of us, and like he says to me like, why the Israelis trying to steal land from the Palestinians? Like that's how he starts. So I'm like, I've got 15 minutes until we get off of this thing. How's this going to go? Right? And I'm stuck with this guy. So I look at him and I said to him, well, who says that we're stealing anything? He says, no, the Palestinians were there before. He said, which Palestinians were there before whom? So he said, the Palestinians. They were there before the Jews came from Europe. I said, yes, some Jews came from Europe after we got murdered in the Holocaust. The survivors came. But that's because we've been trying to come back for like 2,000 years. So he looks at me and goes, what do you mean you're going to come back for 2,000 years? You guys are like white colonialists. I said, firstly, who says that like the Jews in Israel are white? That's a separate question. Arguably, most of them are not. That's a separate question. Many of them came from Sephardic countries and Ethiopia and India and Middle East and northern Africa and Western, far Western Europe and Iberian Peninsula. And there's no single ethnicity that you can point and say Jews are this ethnicity, unless you're an anti-Semite, in which case, whichever ethnicity you don't like, meaning during the Holocaust, we were not white enough. Today, since being white is a bad thing, we're all white. That's what's happened, right? That's Mazel tov. We finally, Hitler's rolling over in whatever grave he might or might not have. That the Jews now are considered white. Very upset about that, right? No, yeah, all of a sudden Jews are white. No, it's whichever ethnicity you don't like. That's what the Jews are, because there's lots of Jews and lots of different flavors of Jews. So I said to them, tell me, what language did King David speak? Asked him. I said, you read the Bible? He says, yeah, I've seen the Bible. I'm like, okay. What language did King David speak? So he looks at me and goes, what difference does it make? I said, tell me, what language does King David speak? So he looked at me and he goes, that's irrelevant. I said to him, what do you mean it's irrelevant? What language did King David speak in? Did he speak Arabic? He goes, no. So I said, if you've read the Bible, maybe he spoke English? Did he speak English? He says, no. English, he wasn't English. Maybe he spoke Latin. Yes, because he came from Europe. No, he does. What language did he speak? Well, he spoke Hebrew. Which people speak Hebrew, clown? So he looks at me. He goes, yeah, but you're not the same Jews as them. I said, who are you to say what kind of Jews we are? Firstly, we are. Secondly, you just told me that the language that the Bible speaks of, you believe in that? Yes. That the language of King David, and we have archaeological evidence of these things, that language is Hebrew. That's not the Palestinian language, even if you want to say that they were a people, and even if you want to say that they were, it's not their language. It's not their culture. It's not them. And at that point in time, the thing dinged, and we exchanged a couple more there, but then he walked off very upset with me. But that's what it means to have a culture. To have a culture that you maintain. Now, Baruch Hashem, we discussed last week, we've resurrected this culture. But then the question that you have to ask is, okay, so there is going to be this Malchus Hashem, Malchus of the Jewish people. That there's going to be like the Navi says, one day Hashem will be one, and His name will be one. The whole world will recognize that Hashem is the dominant Melech. Hashem is going to be the Melech. Hashem is going to be the king. So then these four kingdoms that have existed, that do exist, that have iterated throughout history, it seems to be that these things are plugged in from the beginning of creation. And Hashem has baked these things into the fabric of society. It's built in. It's a built-in thing that exists, which is very bizarre. Because this pasuk is long before the sin of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Right? Meaning, let's understand for a second. There's an excellent summary is probably a bad word for it. It's a thesis, an essay of the Sforno, Rabbi Vaida Sforno, 1500s in Italy. There's two parts to it that are relevant. One is his introduction to Sefer Bereshis, and the other is his introduction to the Torah in general, which is called Kavanas HaTorah, which is usually printed at the beginning of Sefer Vayikra for whatever reasons. But it's really an introduction to his commentary on the Torah, where the Sforno points out that ideally humanity was never supposed to have a Jewish people. Wasn't supposed to be. There was never supposed to be a Jewish people. And there was never supposed to be a Gan Eden. There was never supposed to be a Beis Hamikdash and an Eretz Yisrael as the exclusive places of Kedusha in the world. Meaning, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created mankind. Adam and Chava. They were not Jewish. Right? They were not Jewish. There's a big discussion in Tosfos and Yevamos whether or not Adam Harishon would be would cause tumah ba'ahel. The halacha is that if you come in contact with a dead body, Jewish or not Jewish, so that transmits ritual impurity, transmits tumah. But as anybody that is a kohen or has spoken to a kohen knows, that a kohen cannot be in the room with a dead Jew. But that's only for Jews, meaning a Jew that has died has a level of tumah that the whole house becomes tameh, and you cannot walk into that house. It's a unique halacha with regards to a Jew. So there's an interesting discussion that the Gemara has, the Tosfos discusses whether going into the place in Marasa Machpelah where Avram and Sarah and Yitzchak and Rivka and Yaakov and Leah are buried, whether that would transmit tumah. So arguably, Avram is an Ivri. He is the first Jew. So maybe he would transmit tumah, and his wife and his descendants would all transmit tumah. But what about Adam HaRishon? What about Adam HaRishon? Does he transmit tumah? The Tosfos works on that question. He wasn't Jewish. He wasn't Jewish. There were no such thing as Jews. Okay. So the whole world was supposed to already at that point be able to recognize that there's a God in this world and work towards humanity developing and progressing and becoming whoever we're supposed to become, which the Ramchal writes in Das Tvunos in the 40th parak. The Ramchal writes that were it to be that Adam and Chava would have not messed up in those 6 hours of the Erev Shabbos after they were created, if we would have held back for 6 hours, then we would have fast forwarded 6,000 years. Meaning the 6,000 years that we're going through right now, we could have dealt with that in 6 hours. It could have been done much quicker, much quicker. Reb Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin writes that why is it that was so consequential? So he has a tremendous chiddush. It's a very obvious chiddush once you hear it. But he says because that Avera took place in the days of creation. You know, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created mankind to partner with us, with humanity, in the final acts of creation. And in our final acts of creation, we messed it up. So now that mess up is now baked into creation, and now you have to work it out. It is, so to speak, like a baby that's in utero being injured. That injury now persists throughout the entirety of their life. Like that would be a very devastating thing at the just as the baby's being born, or even just before the baby's being born. If there would be some kind of injury, that could be life altering. That could be significant for the rest of their existence. Meaning, this is the infancy of humanity, the gestation, perhaps even of humanity, and at that very first step, we messed it up. Okay, so now we have to work that out. Now we have 6,000 years of therapy, of like fixing this thing. We have to get it right. And we could do it quicker, in theory. We could do it quicker. Chazal tell us that Mashiach can come any time in the last 2,000 years. So we haven't done so well with that. We're 5,785 right now. So we've had a good, 1,875 years that Mashiach could have come, and he hasn't. So we haven't been doing so well as the Jewish people and as humanity. For those of you that are wondering why, the news. I referenced that for the last 2 millennia. We haven't done so well. Like we're not so good at as a species at like morality and love and care and consistency and working on our negative traits and becoming better people. Like we haven't done fantastic with that. Okay, so we still have time, please God, before HaKadosh Baruch has to make it happen. If Hashem has to make it happen, that's always much worse. You don't want to get to the point that Hashem has to make it happen. So we're working on it, okay. But we could have done this much quicker, much quicker. But it seems to be what Chazal are telling us, what Rish Lakish is telling us in the Medrash, is that that there were these kingdoms that were going to exist even before this. So the Sforno says that were it to be that we would have fixed up immediately, then we would have entered into today what we refer to as Yom HaMashiach or post Yom HaMashiach Olam Haba. I mean, from that Shabbos, that first Shabbos, which is Me'ein Olam Haba, Shabbos is a taste of the world to come, we would have entered into that stage immediately at the beginning. And then we would have done whatever we're supposed to be doing, which is a topic for another time. What exactly are we supposed to be doing? We spoke about this a little bit in the past. What are we supposed to be doing in Olam Haba? Okay. So Hashem said, fine. You're not going to live forever in this utopian state of the permanent, consistent, persistent growth. In order for you to do tshuva for this, so the first thing that happens is death now enters into the world. The lives of people are now shortened. We now live shorter lives. In place of being infinite, meaning immortal, now we live a finite existence. And with that finite existence, you'll understand. You have to make amends, you have to fix things up. And please God, everybody fixes everything up quickly, yofi. And then the Mishnah tells us, 10 generations from Adam until Noach, abject failure. And the way that the Tanakh says it, the way the Torah says it, is that one of the biggest problems that people had was they lived a very, very long time. In a world that was pretty solid. Meaning, yes, it's true that you had to work for a living. It wasn't just like eating off the tree, but like it wasn't the same work that we do today. It was much easier. People were in general much healthier. Life was much longer. There was plenty of food for everybody to eat. And really the only issues that came about were interpersonal. Like people died because other people murdered them. Like that's why lives were cut short. But because everybody was living such a long time, there was no hurry, no pressing need to fix anything, to do anything. And people, were hundreds of years, and then all of a sudden they got bored, and then this is Sukkot and Parashanach. So they got interested in girls that were much younger than them, and take their pick, and all of a sudden now the entirety of humanity is basically corrupt and hedonistic. And then stealing things from each other, and it becomes chaos. And then comes the mabul. And so Hashem changes the script again, and he says, look, Chavra, this isn't working out. So all of a sudden, longevity is cut significantly shorter. There's now seasons where things don't just grow because they grow. Now there's seasons. And let's see if you guys can figure this out now. Get it right. And then there's another failure, which is, okay, humanity bands together, builds a tower to the sky, and says, let's forget about God, and we used to be able to be self-sufficient in and of ourselves, because every person lived a long enough and healthy enough life that they could do whatever they wanted. We can't do that anymore, but if we all get together, we'll help each other. Each person will help each other. We'll create a society where we don't have to think about godliness. We don't have to think about morality. We can just enjoy our society together. And that was now the third failure. You have Adam and Chava, and then you have Noach, and then you have Migdal Bavel. And then Hashem says, this is not working anymore. How's it going to work? It's not going to work top down. Meaning me changing things isn't working anymore. Humanity keeps failing. The only way that this is going to succeed is if people choose to do this themselves. How are they going to choose to do it themselves? So far, this hasn't been so successful. What we are going to do is grassroots movement, where in this mess of a world that exists, there will be somebody that is of upstanding moral character, that will continue to create a culture and a nation and a society of upstanding moral standards. And people will look at this person, at this nation, and say, wow, that's the way to live. How do they do that? And with questioning and with curiosity and with an open home and an open heart and an open mind, slowly but surely humanity will abandon the immoralities and the theft and the gods that they have deluded themselves with, and they'll realize that there is a better way to live. And that was the project called Avram Avinu. That's the project. It says this further, that's effectively where Sefer Bereshis takes you to. And where we're holding now in the parashas, right? And then Avram, and he has work to do. And Hashem gives him a child and gives him a land. And then there's a Yitzchak, and then there's a Yaakov. And you see that there's all these it goes down from like the whole of humanity needs to figure themselves out to like, let's just get it right with like one family. Like, let's start with like one group of people. And let's help that group of people. Why them? Why them specifically? Because they're the most interested in it. That's the simplest explanation, right? Hashem says this about Avram. Why am I choosing Avram? He says it. Explicitly in the Torah. Leman asher yitzaves banaves b'sacharav, because he's going to command his household, his family after him. V'shamru derech Hashem. They're going to uphold the ways of Hashem. La'asas tzedakah mishpat, to do that which is right and that which is just. That's what Avram is going to do. He's going to create a righteous, just society. And then the world is going to look at that. And you see, Avram Avinu is opening his tent and people are coming and they're asking him questions. All of a sudden, you have this new wave of theological upheaval that exists in the world. And Avram says to Hashem over and over again, I can't do this if I don't have a kid. Without a child, it's not going to work. Because if I don't have a child, then how am I going to continue this? And Hashem says to him, you're going to have a child. And he has Yitzchak, good. And then Yitzchak has his challenges, Yaakov and Esav. And Yaakov takes on that mantle. And Yaakov decides that Yaakov is an interesting character within the Avos, because he makes the first significant attempt at moving away from the Avos model to the nation model. Meaning, for the nerds in the room, he went from like the Sith Lord model to the Jedi model. Yes? Sith Lords, it's only Rebbe and Talmud, right? That was Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov. But Yaakov's like, no, we need Jedis. We need lots of people here. So he has a whole set of tribes, but he says in order for them to be able to get together, you need the leadership there. So he makes Yosef the leader of them. And that doesn't go well at all. And then they fight within each other, and then they end up in Mitzrayim, and etc. Which Hashem told Avram, this is the way that it's going to happen. They're going to end up in Mitzrayim. How they're going to get there, he doesn't say. But the fighting in between them, that's how we got there. And we've spent the last 4,000 years trying to get over Jews fighting with Jews. Also, one of the things that we haven't done so well with, I reference the news as Mara Mekomis for the last few thousand years of Jewish infighting. We struggle to get together. By the way, the Machshava writes that this is the reason that the Kohen Gadol cannot go into the Kodesh HaKodashim wearing the breastplate that has the names of the tribes. This is because when you go into the Kodesh HaKodashim, you don't want to arouse the fact that we still think of ourselves as separate. Separatism doesn't exist in the Kodesh HaKodashim. Like you can't get like it arouses the fact that we fight with each other because we're all on different stones. We're not right. This is a challenge, but it wasn't supposed to be this way. The way that the Sforno learns Chumash is and Sefer Shemot, we'll get there. Missed off the opportunity after missed opportunity after missed opportunity. We've failed over and over and over and over and over and over again. But it wasn't ever supposed to be that way. And I say all of this because this Medrash now becomes very difficult to understand. It was never supposed to be that there were supposed to be 4 kingdoms that ruled over the world. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. But if Adam and Chava would have just figured it out with the Eitz Hadas, like they wouldn't have eaten from the Eitz Hadas. Shkoyach. Right? If Noach if Noach somehow or another was able to be Makar of his whole generation, they were like, oh my gosh, you're building a boat? Why? A boat for what? Because God's going to destroy all of us with a flood, right? Ooh, we should do tshuva. Imagine that story. That would have been a very different story. Migdal Bavel, if Avram Avinu would have shut up, as the Medrash tells us, he shut up Migdal Bavel. It's like, guys, what are you doing here? Like, we're building a tower to forget about God. He'd be like, that's a bad idea. They were like, Taka, that's a bad idea. We shouldn't do that. Just close down that project. It would be fantastic, right? And by the way, these Arab Malchus, if the Jewish people wouldn't have messed up in the first place, we would never have gone to Babylonian exile, and Persian exile, and Greek exile, and Roman exile. All of these things. All of these things are the result of mess up after mess up after mess up after mess up. And yet, from the beginning of creation, this is plugged in. You hear the question? This is a kasha. Yes? This is a question. What do you say?
Could be that it's not a matter of taking away someone's choice, but Kadosh Baruch Hu, knowing what would happen anyway, built it in. The facts are going to happen, whether it should have been that way or not. So build it in, and that's it. It's going to be needed because that's how it's just going to work out. Especially if we spoke about the time issue, and there's no before and after. So it's not really part of the timeline. It just is.
So I agree with you. You could say that Hashem created these things from the beginning of creation. But why specifically four? And why specifically these four? And what? Meaning, there's a lot of follow-up questions that I have for you reviewed, right? Yeah. Meaning, there's a lot of follow-up questions. I mean, aside from the fact that you have to deal with like Yediyah and Bechira, divine foreknowledge, and freedom of choice, there's a lot of things to figure out. Meaning, what the Medrash is saying is that the existence of these four kingdoms predates the mistakes that lead to them. And that's a strangeness that we need to address. And the Maharal speaks about this extensively. And you see this in... I originally came to these ideas through the Maharal and through the Ishbitz Sfar, the Meir Shilach, and the Beis Yankov, and the Sod Yesharim, and Tiferes Yosef. They all speak about these ideas. Reb Tzadok speaks about this a lot as well. What we need to understand, and we'll start from a pasuk. This is a pasuk that is Haftarah. Haftarah for fast days. Tanakh, yeah, somewhere.
Middle.
There we go.
I was going to say that.
Yeah.
The entire, how those four things, to me, it's a great proof of free will.
How so?
The fact that they were ingrained before it even happened, and the fact that we keep messing up proves free will.
But it certainly does prove the fact that we have free will. But why is that there? Meaning, and why are these things there?
Because I feel like everything revolves around tshuva in religion, so it's like...
That's true.
So the fact that they exist means we were always deemed to fail, to do tshuva, to then succeed. So
yes and no. What you're talking about is a big sugya, and it's a very kedai sugya, but it doesn't explain why these four things specifically. You know what I'm saying?
One of those four nations.
Right. Why these kingdoms? Remember, these aren't just nations, they're kingdoms. They're dominant cultural entities.
They caused the ethos of the world.
Okay.
But even now and future generations.
So what is that ethos of the world?
The ability to reason, laws, like basically what America's founded on.
Okay. But what are these for? That's what we have to figure out. And it's a pasuk. It starts with a pasuk. There's a pasuk at the end of the Haftarah for fast days. Pasuk says as follows: Kayamar Hashem, so says Hashem, Al Yishalel Chacham b'Chachmasai. A wise person should not praise himself, meaning Yishalel is the reflexive verb. Should not hold himself in high esteem. I think they glorify himself. That's how they translate it. Al Yishalel Chacham b'Chachmasai. A wise person with his wisdom. V'al Yishalel Gibar b'Gvurasai. And a strong person should not praise themselves, should not glorify themselves with their strength. Va'al Yisrael ashir be'ashrai. And a wealthy person should not glorify himself with his wealth. Ki bezos yisalel hamisalel. This is what a person should glorify themselves in. Haskel v'yada osi, to contemplate and know me. Ki ani Hashem, I am Hashem, oseh chesed, mishpat, utzedakah ba'aretz. I do kindness, I do justice, I do righteousness in the world. Ki be'ele chafatzti no'am Hashem. This is what I desire, says Hashem. There are three things that the pasuk describes here. Al Yisrael chacham b'chachmasai, v'al Yisrael hagibor b'gvurasai, v'al Yisrael ashir b'ashrei. Wisdom, strength, and wealth. These are the three things the pasuk says. Don't think of yourself as too important because of these things. And we should also point out that these are not necessarily physical things. It's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. The Mishnah says, Ezehu chacham, who's a wise person? Halomed mikol adam, one who learns from everybody. Ezehu gibar, who is a strong person? Hakovesh es yitzra, who conquers his evil inclination. Ezehu ashir, who is a happy person? Hasamech b'chelka, he's happy with what he has. Meaning, there's wealth and wisdom and strength that exist materially and spiritually. And the Tiferes Yosef quotes from his great-grandfather, the Ishbitzer, the first Ishbitzer of the Meishalach, that what the pasuk is telling you is not just the base level stuff, it's even telling you the higher level stuff. Meaning, Al Yisrael hagibor b'gvurasai, that the strong person that conquers his Yetzirah should not praise himself for that. Ki bezos Yisrael misalel, this is what you should praise yourself about. Haskel v'yada, see, knowledge of God, which is different from wisdom. It's a chacham b'chachmasai. It's a chacham. Says the Maharal, the four kingdoms that exist in the world are kingdoms that, at the apex of their cultural hierarchy, are three distinct values. And we'll talk about the fourth in a little bit. But the world of Bavel, the world of Babylonia, which in different places you see in different Sfarim referred to as Malchus HaKavod, the world of honor. Malchus HaKavod, Malchus HaGevura, the world of strength. The Babylonians prided themselves more than anything else on their prowess, on their strength, on their might. Nebuchadnezzar, Melech Bavel, you see throughout Sefer Daniel, prides himself on his might. He is a gibor.
They're all physical.
Not just physical, meaning it's from top to bottom. Strength is the dominant value that exists in Bavel. Might. That is completely different to the world of Persia that takes over afterwards. What is the dominant value in Persia? You see from the beginning of Megillas Esther. Wealth. Achashverosh has a lavish party for 6 months where everybody can do whatever they want. In Bavel, you could do whatever you wanted if you were the strongest. In Persia, you can do whatever you want if you are the richest. And Greece?
Science, knowledge, man.
Knowledge, wisdom.
And Rome, all of them.
So Rome, which is the fourth Malchus, the number refers to as bzuya me'od. It is denigrated completely because it is a bastard hybrid of all of those things. It doesn't have its own unique thing. It has all of these things amalgamated together and you see this, Ad Hayam Hazeh, that there are cultures in the world that have these hybridizations of like what is the most important thing, and it goes up and down in different places at different times. I mean, we're living in a world where all of these three things kind of mix together.
They're all doomed to fail.
They are doomed to fail, but the reason why is not obvious. It's not obvious, and it requires some explanation. But before we can get to that explanation, we should understand and explain, what does it mean that these are the dominant powers that exist? So I had this conversation with somebody a little while back where I made the argument that it requires a little bit of definition here, that there's no such thing as an atheist. I don't believe that there's any such thing as an atheist. I think that there are people that don't believe in God. But that's not the same thing as being an atheist. And this is a Ramban in the Aseret Dibros, and it's Rabbeinu B'chai as well, explains this extensively. That in order to be a theist, as we understand a person that believes in God, so you need to believe, says the Ramban, that there's a creator of heaven and earth, meaning somebody that created the world, that creator is not just like something that started the world, but is also an intelligent being, meaning is a conscious, existent. And that conscious existence that created the world also cares about what goes on in the world. The Rambam points us out at the end of Parshas Bo that this is what the Makkos were there to explain. Meaning the 10 plagues proved that there was a creator because he could do whatever he wants. Right? Meaning it originated and he broke the world and remade it, as we've discussed in the past. Meaning the rules of nature bend to the creator of nature. And that he can distinguish and discern things, which you see in the pasuk, especially some of the later Makkos, v'hiflesi, that Hashem distinguishes between Egyptian cattle and Jewish cattle. It means that this is a conscious being. And then later, Egyptian firstborns and Jewish firstborns. Right. Although that might have been, you could argue, as Parah did, that maybe this was a location-based thing. Right? But by the time you distinguish between a Jewish firstborn and not, right? So, and Jews that painted blood on the doorpost versus those that didn't. Meaning that this is a conscious being, and that conscious being cares about what you're doing. And then the Ramban throws in there, and tangentially, it also proves the authenticity of Nevuah, because Moshe Rabbeinu announced what was going on ahead of time, and all of that would have been impossible. So that's to be a believer in God. But and that's the point of the whole story of Yitzhak Mitzrayim, according to the Ramban, is to teach that emunah for all future generations. But even a person that does not believe today, that doesn't believe that God created the world. So you ask them, so what kicked off the Big Bang? Mother Nature, science. Okay, good. So they believe something created the world. Good. Something created the world. They don't believe that it is a conscious being, that a being that cares about the world, but they believe that something created the world. Has to be something. There's a Big Bang. World began at some point. Something made it. Something. So that's the beginning of certainly everybody in America. I mean, maybe in other places, cultures, atheists, I think, pretty much only exist in the West. Like most of the rest of the world is theist. But it's an interesting quirk. But
when you don't have needs for things, it's
much easier to be an atheist. First world problems, right? So, but then something interesting happens. Every person that you speak to, even the most ardent atheist, if you say to them, if I gave you a magic wand and told you, if I wave the magic wand, all of humanity would believe this thing, would believe in something, what would you want everybody to believe in? Everybody has something that they want you to believe in. It might be like animal rights, right? If all of humanity believed in animal rights, the world would be perfect, right? If all of humanity believed, whatever it is, whatever the thing is, meaning every person has an aim that they believe that that humanity should aim towards. And they say, no, everybody's entitled to their own belief. Yes, I agree with you. Everybody's entitled to their own beliefs. Mazel tov, love you, beautiful. But if you could make everybody believe in one thing, what would that one thing be? Everybody has an answer to that question. It's an amazing, try it.
Life after death. It has to be a purpose to being alive.
I'm saying, but even the atheist that doesn't believe in life after death, doesn't believe in God, if you would say to them, what do you believe in? He believes in something. Right, that everybody should be, okay, define it for me. Write it down. By the way, if you push them, they would be able to come up with some kind of ethical manifesto. That, my dear friends, is called their God.
Set of morals about it.
Right?
That's what they worship.
Right. That's the thing that they aim towards. It is impossible. It is baked into our kishkas as human beings. It is impossible to live in this world and not aim for something. Everybody does. There is not a single human being in the world. You say to them, here's a magic wand. You can make everybody in the world believe something. What would you do? And he goes, right? Don't want it. I don't think anything should change. I think the world is perfect. If you think the world is perfect, you need a padded cell and some significant medications.
That's the real atheist.
Right? But nobody believes that, right? Nobody believes that. That's a very sick person. Nobody believes that the world is perfect the way that it is. Everybody believes that the world could be better if, whatever that if is the thing that they... And then there's a question of, okay, how do we get there? How do we get there? And different societies and different cultures have different methodologies of getting there. And this is both in the positive and in the negative. So in Babel, the way of making the world Babylonian, which they believed was the ultimate goodness, was power. And that power, that strength was from top to bottom. The more power that you have, the more that you can change the world. The more that you change the world, the more the world is like the utopian society that you believe is correct, whatever that correctness is, whatever God you worship. That's baked in. You need to believe in something. And that was their cultural identity. That was their methodology. That was the way that they needed to live in order to... Now, the chap of culture, and this is the bizarre thing about culture, is that if you were to ask a Babylonian, what is the most important value? Probably wouldn't even have said gevura, covered. Strength and honor. For the same reason, I tell the joke that two little fish are swimming down a stream, and they see an old wise fish swimming towards them, and he says to them, "Be careful, young fish. The water there is very cold." And the one little fish looks at the other one and goes, "What's water?" Right? The thing that you swim in is invisible to you. You don't see it, but it is who you are. That's called culture. That's the thing that like you are without knowing that you are that thing. Right? There's the things that we know. There's the things that we know we don't know. There's the things that we don't know that we don't know. And then there's the things that we don't know that we do know. Right? That thing is called culture. It's on that the Torah says, by the way, there's a Hebrew word for that. What's the word for the things that are cultural that you do, but you don't know? You just... In halacha, it's called a chok. Those are the things that you do, but you don't know why you do them. It's culture. It's cultural. The Torah tells us in Sefer Yikra in Parshas Achamos that there is an isur of following the chukas hagoyim, following the chukos, inexplicable laws of the non-Jews. So you look at you, what do you mean I'm going to follow the inexplicable laws of the non-Jews? Why would I do that? That's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous thing to do. Why would I follow laws of the non-Jews that don't make any sense? Really?
Our chukim don't make sense to us either.
Correct.
Follow them.
Correct. But why would I follow theirs? Why would I follow theirs? Anybody here ever worn a tie? Why do you wear a tie?
Culture.
It's a stupid piece of cloth around your neck. For what? Fashion. Right? Fashion is culture. Fashion is culture. It's culture. By the way, I don't want to ruin anybody's life, but I mentioned this Mincha Marav a few days ago. I apologize, but it's worth pointing out. Anybody here ever put candles on a cake and blown out the candles?
Mm-hmm.
Why?
It's for birthday.
Why? Why is it for your birthday? Shtick. What shtick? Where's it from?
Somewhere, somehow, someone decided it was a great idea.
Yeah.
It comes from anywhere.
Like the lemmings following, jumping into the sea. We
Yeah.
always do it without
I've been doing it for years.
100%. Where's it from? You have no idea.
No idea. Wikipedia.
Absolutely Avodah. By the way, its basis is absolutely Avodah. Pagan. It is. Right. It is originally. So I think the Chazon Ish met a Catholic that converted to Judaism. He told him that his father was a priest, and he told him that it was an original pagan custom based on like some society that worshipped the moon god. That's why you have a round cake with light, with candles on it, and then when you blow it out, you make a wish. And like it was that whole thing. That whole thing is the whole thing looks like a pagan ritual.
It's like throwing the penny in the thing of water.
It's a different mishigas. But I'm saying, if somebody were to explain to you like a birthday cake thing, you would look at that and be like, "That's insane. Why would anybody do that?" Right?
The whole world does it.
The whole world does it. You know. By the way, you know who popularized it? The restaurants, because that's how they get you to pay for the dessert. Right? This became a shtick, and then they have a whole production. They bring it out with all the waiters and waitresses, and they sing happy birthday, and they put the candles, and they have the why do they do all of that? Mishigas pagan culture that all of a sudden the whole world, that's chukas hagoyim. It's a chayk. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. Why do you do this thing? It's insane. Right? Why would you do this? It doesn't make any sense. None of it makes any sense. There is no rational, logical meaning to it. And people get upset with me when I say this. They're like, "Why? It's a birthday. It makes you happy." Okay, but why do you do this?
Would it be on the same level as a minhag, many of which are not based on any halachic background, just something that someone did and nobody may remember the reason?
So this is why, if you take a look at all the svarim that discuss minhagim, they discuss where the minhag comes from. Because a minhag that doesn't have a basis in halacha, that wasn't established by somebody of significance that like understood what they were doing, is called a minhag shtus or a minhag tas. And you don't do it. We don't just do things. If the Torah says to do it, we do it. If the Rabbanim say to do it, we do it. But some random person that decides that they're gonna, I'll give you an example. That's I won't mention any names because Marty might know some of them. But we back in Teaneck NCSY once upon a time, we used to have a lot of kids that would come to us, many of whom were not from religious backgrounds. And I still remember there was a girl that was about to go wash Netilas Yadayim. There was a lot of people waiting to wash Netilas Yadayim, and she looks at her friend and she's like, "Can I borrow your ring?" And she's like, "What do you mean borrow my ring?" She's like, "When you wash your hands, you have to put a ring in your mouth." Right? You ever seen girls washing their hands? You take off the ring. Where do you put the ring? You're not going to put it on the thing. It's dirty. It's messy. Well, you wash your hands. You dry hands, put the ring on, and make a bracha, right? So she's like, she had never seen any of this Judaism thing before. She had seen washing. Now she's seeing washing hands, and she's saying brachas, and she's seeing girls with a ring in their mouth. She's like, that's part of right. It's part of what we're supposed to do here. So imagine if that became a thing. That's called a minhag shtus. That's insane. But But there are many things that's called that's chukas hagoyim. So we would not notice what the chukas of it surrounds you. That's called the chayk. The things that surround you. In Bavel, there was power. There was power. I would argue that value of power being the most dominant cultural element probably exists today in Russia.
China.
Probably in China. I'm not as familiar, but probably.
Wealth is Russia.
America, it's wealth.
America's everything.
In Russia, being powerful makes you wealthy. In America, being wealthy makes you powerful. Right?
Yeah.
Meaning the thing that makes you powerful in America, that makes you chashuv, is money, for sure. We're living in Achashverosh territory here.
You don't have to worry about wisdom.
So there was a strong attempt called the Ivy League once upon a time,
They're the ones who know this is not wise.
right? That wisdom should be prized. There was a time, arguably, like the British Empire, you could argue, like, believed in like wisdom as because we know more than you, right? We will export our wisdom,
It's the language, the literature,
Right?
everything.
like we will export our knowledge to the world, and our knowledge is what gives us. And because
That was,
this, say what?
that was like the end of Rome.
But it came from Greece, meaning Greece was the exporters of knowledge in the world,
Well,
right? The idea of Socratic method and science and philosophy, like that was Greece. Rome took pieces of all of this. But if you look at, like, meaning even the history of like the British Empire colonizing Africa, it was like, we're literate, you're illiterate, therefore we can kill you and take your stuff because we're better than you. What makes us better than you? We know more. We know more stuff than you. And since we know more than you, we're better. This like deep-seated inherent racism that came as a result of knowledge. We know stuff. Therefore, we're better than you. America doesn't believe in a knowledge-based system anymore. Now it's exclusively, practically exclusively, a wealth-based system. Meaning rich people get to do whatever they want. Poor people have to grovel. There was a video that it was so honest. The Onion sometimes is the most honest news network. A guy in his, it was like a video of like they were interviewing a 1%er before the election, and they said to him, multi-millionaire. They said to him, the whole thing was obviously staged. It was comedy, but very real. They said to him, "Who are you voting for?" And he said, "I don't care." And they looked at him and like, "What do you mean you don't care? The whole country is like, you know why I don't care? Because I'm very, very rich. And in 4 years' time, I'm going to be even richer." You see him like chipping away at his golf ball. He's like, "So I don't care." And it's true to a very like disarming place. It's true. People get caught up in stuff, but like ultimately, like for poor people, the election makes a big difference, depending on what flavor of poor person you are, what flavor of sick person you are. But I'm saying, if you're a very, very rich person, then America is open to you. You can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. Maybe there's pockets of the world that like wisdom still like has a value. But ultimately, what the Maharal explains is that these four kingdoms that existed are not just four different groups of people. There are four potential identities that exist in the world, and really three, and the fourth one we'll probably have to speak about next time. What, meaning, how do you have one that's an amalgamation of all of those things, from which Malchus Hashem comes, ultimately, right? Meaning the last one that contains all of it is the end before Mashiach comes. But these aren't just four groups of people. These are four totally distinct ways of looking at the world. And the chap is that this is baked into existence. Because in order for human beings to have freedom of choice, in order for us to be able to accomplish and to achieve, we need to go through these three gauntlets, each person in and of themselves, is to work on being a person that is in gvura, to realize that strength is not just material strength, strength is inner strength. And then you have to support your family, you have to make a living, you have to be wealthy, good. And then to realize that wealth does not come from money, wealth comes from being satisfied with the things that you have. And then there's the world of wisdom, to realize that wisdom is not knowing a lot of things, but that wisdom is best defined, like the Mishnah says, as open-mindedness. That's real wisdom. It's not the accumulation of knowledge. And then once you have figured out that there is an epitome of knowledge and an epitome of wealth, and there is an epitome of strength, to realize that none of those things are ultimately what a person should be proud of, because that is just getting to the beginning of who we are supposed to be as people. This is, I'll read to you from the verse, yes, I'm quoting from the Ishbitze. He says like this: that the one that conquers his evil inclination, that becomes powerful in a real way, conquers his evil inclination, Yakir Heitev should recognize recognizes that the capacity that they have to win the internal battles that they have won, that capacity and their victories and their wins are exclusively because Hashem gave you the capacity to do so, so that you will build a closer relationship with Hashem. That's called Malchus Hashem. That all of this, all of my personal capacities and faculties, ultimately get me to a place that I recognize that there's a God in this world, and that I am now an elevated person to serve Him. Which means that the world has to have built into it these tendencies and capacities. It didn't have to be that they all turned out to be distinct kingdoms that believed in this as their false gods, and that these things became their cultures, and that they dominated the world and murdered people in the name of power, and murdered people in the name of wisdom, and murdered people in the name of wealth. But the capacity for these things are the darkness and the calamity and the chaos and the emptiness that comes before recognizing V'ruach Elokim Merachafes al Pnei Hamayim. Meaning what this pasuk in Bereshis is describing is the bedrock of the world on a psychological, sociological, emotional, personal, interpersonal level, as well as philosophical and theological. But a society that grabs hold of one particular thing and makes that their dominant power, even if they reach the highest heights of those powers, the wealthiest nation in the history of wealth, the wisest nation in the history of wisdom, even if they would realize that their real wisdom comes from learning from everybody, and then what? Haskel v'yada osi. No. Says the Navi. Now you take all of that, and you're like, that's what Hashem wants us to appreciate in the world. That could have happened inside of each and every person, as it should, without Golus and exile and Avodah Zarah and Adam and Chava sitting with the Itzadas Tavara and the Mabul and Noach and Migdal Babel. Meaning, this is the bedrock of humanity. Every person needs to work on this. And that's the freedom of choice part. That doesn't necessarily mean that you sin. It's not necessarily failure. There's trial and error. But that's called growth. And what the Medrash is telling us, says the Maharal, is that these things are part of us. You got to work on all of this. And then if humanity does it right, then we figure out what we're supposed to do. And if we don't, then these things can turn into their own monsters all by themselves, as they did. But because these things are so fundamental bedrock to people, to the nature of being a person, it is possible to confuse these things with Malchus Hashem. Because everybody has to go through these gauntlets. And it is possible to spend your whole life chasing Gevura. You can do it. And then forget that there's a God. All of that becomes possible. You can make Gevura your God. You can make Ashirus your God. You can make Chochmah your God. They are false gods. They're not real. Even though they are all infinite pursuits. Like David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Va'osher va'akavod milfanecha. Wealth and honor are before God. You know that something is godly and not, meaning something is abstract. That a desire is elevated and abstract and not base. The desire to eat, taiva to eat, has a limit. It has a limit. You ever worked in a pizza store? First day working in the pizza store, they tell you can have lunch, you can have pizza. You're like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing in the world. Imagine 2 months after working, you spend a whole summer working in the pizza store. And then you come home for dinner, you're starving, and your mom's like, hey, I got pizza. You're like, seriously? Can we just have something else? Meaning you can get sick of something. You can decline a slice of pizza. Or the greatest pleasures in the world, you'll decline. You can have enough of it because it has a limit. But imagine, like, a bank teller working in a bank. She's the front office bank teller. People come with wads of cash to deposit. So she counts hundreds of thousands of $100 bills every month. Somebody were to come up to her and say, here's a wad of cash for you. But nah, I'm sick of it. Sick of it. Sick of money. Can't look at it anymore. I don't want it. You keep it. Give it to someone else. Impossible, right? Why? Because wealth is infinite. Strength and honor are infinite. Wisdom is infinite. And anything that is abstract to the point that it is infinite is very easy to confuse with God, because God's also infinite. And each culture that took on that thing, that confused that for God, is the Avodah Zarah of that nation. And in the defeat of that nation, we take back that part that was stolen, and we incorporate that into the Jewish people. We'll talk about that more as we get a little closer to Hanukkah, but that should be enough for now.
I would argue that that's right.